All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar, Commercial Compliance Audit, Moving from Reactive to Proactive, brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by PRGX. We do have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. If you need any technical assistance, we first recommend you pressing the F5 key or Control R to refresh your browser. If you continue to experience difficulty, you can use the Q&A box and we will respond right away. There will be no call-in number for today's session. To connect, all you need to do is have access to either computer, tablet, or cell phone audio, and everyone has been muted today. So that you don't miss any shared content or an opportunity to share valued feedback with us, we recommend you enable pop-up within your browser. For your convenience, everything in the webinar console is fully customizable. So you can move things around, resize them, even turn captions on for this event on the media player. Again, you can minimize any of the engagement tools, and then they will go down to the bottom toolbar. Then you can click on those to maximize those. So as the webinar is going, you can kind of play around with each of the engagement tools. At the bottom of your console, you'll also find a resources box. That's where you'll be able to download the slides today. Also, be prepared to answer four polling questions during the webinar. A pop-up box will appear when you run each poll. Please choose from the multiple choice answers and hit submit. We would love to have your participation and insight today. Speaking of questions, you can ask questions at any time during the presentation by submitting them through the Q&A box. We'll leave time at the end of the session to answer as many questions as time allows. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. That out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We'll have John Daniels. John Daniels is the VP of Audit Operations and has worked for PRGX, leading service delivery to some of North America's largest clients. Having started in recovery audit in 2001 and working across multiple industry verticals, he brings 35 years of industry experience and offers extensive supplier contract audit expertise. We'll also hear from Mark Brousseau, who has over 30 years over the past 30 years, Mark has established himself as a thought leader on accounts payable, accounts receivable, payments, and document automation. A popular speaker at industry conferences and on webinars and podcasts, Brousseau advises prominent end users and solutions and services providers on how to use automation to improve document and payments-driven business processes. Brousseau has chaired numerous educational conferences and has served on several industry committees and boards. He resides in Center City, Philadelphia, with his wife and 3 sons. And with that out of the way, I would like to welcome our speakers to begin our webinar.
Great, thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is John Daniels, and I'm the, as Laura mentioned, the practice leader for the contract compliance team here at PRGX, and have been doing this kind of work for the last 20 years. And hopefully I can share some of that knowledge and experience with you during our time together today. One of the things that I really want to focus on as an objective for today's session is how to allow you to get more out of your contract audit programs. Flip ahead here. Many of you may have been exposed to, or at least have an awareness of, contract compliance audits. And contract compliance audits have been, more or less a best practice, I would say, in business and industry for the last 10 years or so. In certain industries, longer than that. But certainly when we got started performing contract compliance audits years ago, there were a lot of people who were totally unfamiliar with the practice. It's a lot more accepted and understood practice now, but still the word's getting out. And I think contract compliance audits are an excellent methodology for answering the question, did you get the deal you negotiated for? Usually these kinds of audit programs also incorporate an element of recovery. So historical billing error recovery, and they can be great for that aspect too. Unfortunately, too often in the marketplace, what we see is that the recovery element, along with the compliance assurance, is really where the value opportunity ends for some clients. They really see it as a recovery realization opportunity, and when they do that, we believe that they leave a lot of value unrealized in the process. And what we're going to talk about today is incorporating a robust learning loop. So taking the learnings that come out of a program and incorporating those back into your processes and systems, as well as adding proactive methodologies to realize the benefits and of the opportunities identified sooner and with a higher realization on the back end. And we're going to talk through, what some of those methodologies are that'll help you get to that point. But before we jump into a deeper discussion on what we refer to as commercial compliance auditing, which is that more holistic approach to performing auditing, I wanted to spend a few minutes just to talk about contract compliance auditing. Now, contract compliance auditing forms the central core of both a standalone contract compliance audit program, as well as a more expansive, more holistic commercial compliance program. And here at PRGX, we utilize really two approaches to performing contract compliance audits. One is the supplier contract audit. Now, this is a supplier-facing, formally announced, based on the audit clauses in your contract, so formally announced audit of your supplier's data. And utilizing this approach, we can audit virtually any material financial risk that exists in the contract. It's an excellent approach for doing a very comprehensive, deep dive and broad audit. It takes a little longer to do. There's more interaction, obviously, with the supplier, not to mention your own in-house staff. But at the end of the day, you will learn a tremendous amount about how that contract is being operationalized. We team that approach with what we call our billing compliance audit approach. And billing compliance audit focuses on client-provided data. It's not a formally announced audit. It's done behind the scenes. And the only time the supplier recognizes that there's an audit ongoing is when we identify issues and bring them forward to the supplier to address them. These two methodologies, as I say, work excellent in kind of a complementary approach to one another. There's no overlap. Billing compliance audits focus more specifically on direct material suppliers, and due to the fact that we're utilizing client-provided data, we really are kind of limited in terms of the kinds of claims that the kinds of issues that we can identify, typically related to price and quantity variance and other contract risks that can be evaluated with client-only data, things like allowances, perhaps price protection and rebates. Those sorts of audit risks can be evaluated on the billing and compliance approach. Far less broad than a supplier contract audit. But as I say, they work well in comparison to one another, and they have similar objectives. So the objectives are, in both cases, learnings and insights and understanding as to how the contracts are working, and recoveries. And together, they form a great approach to to identifying those specific outcomes. Now, I talked a minute ago about how I thought maybe some of you had been exposed to contract compliance audits and others may not have. It might help me to understand that a little bit better. So I wanted to, I set up a polling question here to kind of find out a little bit more about your background. Mark?
All right, John, let's ask our audience a poll question. What we want to know is, what is your experience level or familiarity with supplier contract audits in the past? What is your experience level or familiarity with supplier contract audits in the past? Have you been directly involved with the performance of these types of audits? Have you had visibility into these audits? Are you aware of them but have not been involved in these audits? Or Are you new to the idea of contract compliance audits? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. All right, John. So your audit recovery services aside, how good a job do most businesses do in managing their supplier contracts?
Well, as you might imagine, Mark, it can be a challenge, right? I mean, people already have full rosters of things that they need to do, and slowing down to try to drill into contracts to determine whether they've been, complied with. Number one, the time element just doesn't really allow it, and number two, they may not always have the information available to them to answer the question on whether the supplier has been billing accurately. Many of the types of risks that we audit, particularly in the supplier contract audit methodology, are reliant upon information that only exists in the supplier's environment, and so they're not even able to validate whether the billing has happened in accordance with the contract. And so the level of compliance is not infrequent for it to be off, particularly in your most complex contracts. And certainly clients are usually not very well equipped to validate that on their own.
I know we're going to talk about the return on investment someone can get from a contract compliance program, but talk to me about just how big a problem this is. It sounds like a sieve in many ways here. I mean, is this the kind of thing that can really inhibit a company's growth if they can't manage their contracts more tightly?
Well, I mean, I think what it does is it speaks to, a lot of loss of value, right? So as to the extent that contributes to the ability to grow and expand, there's definitely leakage happening here. And so and it's leakage, both historical leakage and future leakage, right? So there's really an opportunity to, and we'll talk a lot about this as we go along, talk about the ability to identify problems and fix them going forward to prevent the leakage happening on a go-forward basis. So certainly this is a best practice, as I mentioned earlier, that will help contribute to, a more stable procurement environment going forward, and one which delivers the value that you want to out of your contracts.
All right. We asked our attendees, what is your experience level or familiarity with supplier contract audits in the past? Nearly half of our attendees today, John, say they're aware of them, but they've not been involved in these audits. About 1/3 of our attendees said they're completely new to the idea of contract compliance audits. You've got some work to do here, John. 9% of our attendees said they've been directly involved with the performance of these types of audits. Another 9% said they've had visibility into these audits. All right, so what would be your single biggest piece of advice to those 1/3 of our attendees who are completely new to this idea? What's the single most important thing they need to walk away from today's webinar knowing about contract compliance audits?
Well, first, that it exists and what really drives the value in these programs and how it can be applied in their environment, I think, is the most important thing. And ensuring that their contracts, that there's an awareness to really perform these kind of programs. The contracts have to be built in a way that allows it. And I'll give you a simple example. If you're not doing this already, make sure your contracts have a good, solid audit clause built into them, because that's a critical element to being able to conduct these kinds of audits and realize the benefits that they deliver.
John, it's striking to me that 47% of our attendees have been aware of this but not involved. That begs the question, what's the biggest misperception about supplier contract audits?
That it's really a recovery-only exercise. I think that's really one of the things we want to drive home today, is really gaining, helping people understand that to really drive and multiply the going forward value on this program, if it's focused strictly on recovery, that's great. You can do that, and there's no problem with that, but you're missing a big opportunity. And that's a component.
The dramatic pause threw me off there, John. That's okay. You just wanted to test me. I know. It's all right. They did such a great job with that poll question, John. Let's do one more. I'm going to take a deep breath before I read this one. Based on your knowledge of these audits, how would you rank the most compelling value drivers of a contract compliance audit? Leakage prevention, learning why we are leaking value and plugging the gaps for substantial and recurring future cost savings. Recovery, show me the money. I want to recover all they have overcharged. Supplier transparency and assurance. I want to better understand how our supplier is managing the contract. How would you rank those three benefits? A, B, and C? B, A, and C? A, C, and B? Or do you think there's a better benefit out there that's not been identified here? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. All right, John, so what's the number one reason that somebody picks up the phone, calls your company, and says, we've got to fix this problem?
I mean, truthfully, recovery is it's the big banner up there in terms of what.
That's what they're after.
That's what catches their attention. But, what we learn, and we work with our clients, in a programmatic way that oftentimes spans, really a continual approach, many years over time. And as they become more enlightened and more understanding of how these programs can really supercharge value delivery beyond recovery, their view of how to answer this question can change. There's no right or wrong answer to this question. Actually, clients answer this question in different ways, and none of them are wrong. They all have their own motivations and objectives. But I do believe that A there is a critical component to maximizing overall value, and that's really the message we're going to try to deliver here today.
John, are you seeing any change in the value drivers as a result of the economic uncertainty in which we're in today?
Not really. I think that, recovery continues to be an important driver, especially to people new to the process and really just trying to, kind of integrate themselves into what these programs are all about. But I do think, and of course, that's important in any market, an up market, a down market. Everybody's always looking to recover value, right? And we will always deliver value if we're picking the right contracts too. So I don't want to ever diminish the recovery value component of what we do, but I'm only suggesting that there's an equally important component that often gets overlooked.
All right, we asked our attendees to rank the value drivers of a contract compliance audit: leakage prevention, recovery, and supplier transparency and assurance. And it looks like, John, you have your thumb pretty firmly on the pulse of this crowd. It sounds like 39% of our attendees identified recovery, prevention, or leakage prevention, and supplier transparency as being the key value driver. 28% said it's the way in which our value drivers were presented: leakage prevention, recovery, and supplier transparency. 26% said leakage prevention and then supplier transparency. You're telling the crowd today, John, there's no wrong answer here. The key is to do this, right?
It's just interesting to me to be able to see how this comes back. But I mean, I would say this is probably pretty consistent with what I would have guessed if you asked me to guess ahead of time, Mark.
Yeah, I'm curious about the 5% of you who said something else. Use that question and answer tool on your screen to send me what it is you believe the driver is. All right, John, so let's take a deeper dive into this idea of contract compliance audits.
Yep. Yeah, I think, again, just to kind of reemphasize this point, when too much focus is placed on the recovery component, you're taking your eye off the equally important component of driving value beyond recovery, which is in abundance in the work that we do, right? I mean, as long as you're willing to pick it up and take it, it's there to be had. And I think that's the main point here. And I guess just an added point in that for those that are less familiar, because we're working in an environment in contract compliance auditing where there are shades of gray that get introduced into the issues that we identify, because any contract language could be subject to multiple interpretations. We all know that, and sometimes contracts aren't that well written. And so to press for a certain point of view to maximize recoveries to a full extent risks putting the supplier relationship at risk. So to the extent you're able to to moderate that to a certain extent, to moderate the push for recoveries, to maximize recoveries, and add the value drivers, the non-recovery value drivers to the program, it really sets you up to deliver in a program like this much more sustained and ongoing value. With that, I wanted to kind of turn attention. So we talked about contract compliance auditing, and we kind of differentiate contract compliance auditing because that's a programmatic approach. It's also an individual methodology, but it's a programmatic approach to how we view this kind of work. We also have commercial compliance auditing, and the difference is an element of I guess prioritization and how we talk about it, how we think about it, how we view the opportunity to bring value back to the company. And mostly it's about, I think in the commercial compliance approach, we think of it as being a commercial optimization program. All self-funded, of course, which is great. Nobody minds that piece, right? And it's not only self-funded, but it's self-funded plus some. So that recovery component is still a big part of what we're doing here. But in commercial compliance, we're really emphasizing, the opportunity to learn, to correct, to implement, and to implement those proactive procedures that we've talked about to accelerate value, to expand value, and all those things combined really look to deliver, a much better outcome than just straight contract compliance auditing alone. And this slide attempts to illustrate that. So as you can see here, this is a sort of a view of how value is derived in a commercial compliance program. And as you can see, recoveries are an important component of those. But the more substantial value opportunity exists when we can move into the prevention zone and really start to work on delivering that future cost savings. And we do that through the learning loop. So we'll perform the individual supplier contract audit or the billing compliance audit to learn what's working well within that supplier relationship, what's not working well. It will also identify those opportunities for recovery. We'll go out and we'll work to achieve that recovery. One point I want to talk about a little bit later in more detail is the fact that, and I mentioned it earlier, is the fact that oftentimes in this kind of auditing, because there's first of all, it's a reactive approach. It's being done, I'm talking about the contract compliance approach, being done after 2 to 4 years after the fact. There are factors that come in that impact our ability to collect in full on issues identified. So we're going to end up recovering something likely less than 100% of the issues identified. But we will recover a substantial value regardless. But now we're going to take those learnings both on a specific individual supplier basis and applying what we learn on one supplier to those suppliers that have similar contracts or similar kinds of risk profiles as the one supplier we audited, and proliferate those learnings, get that learning loop activity built into our system to recognize the benefits of the things that we learned during the audit. And when we can do that, when we can close those gaps, we have 100% realization on the future cost savings. So we don't have that diminishment of value because now it's built into the contract. And we've multiplied it from a single supplier to many suppliers. So you can see where that multiplier effect really starts to play an important part of how that prevention zone can deliver substantial additional value. But combined, this represents the value that comes back from a from a commercial compliance approach to auditing.
It almost
Okay,
sounds
with
like
that,
a continuous process improvement loop you've got going there, John. Is that accurate?
that's the idea. That's the idea. And you'd think at some point you might work yourself out of a job, and certainly in certain areas we do, but there's always new suppliers coming into the rotation, and there's such a variety of different risks that exist in contracts that there's always something unique we're coming across, and we work really hard to select the right contracts that have unique risks that are representative of the things that are going on in your procurement environment, to make sure that we can get that multiplier effect going forward.
All right, that brings us to our third poll question, which is about to be displayed on your screen. This time we want to know, for value leakage identified during a contract compliance audit, what do you estimate is the typical blended range of actual recovery value realized? How much money or how much value do you think folks are actually realizing? Is it more than 75%? Is it between 50 and 75%? Is it between 25 and 50% is the range of value realized? Or is it less than 25%? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. Hey, John, who's usually driving this audit process you're describing today? Is it accounts payable? Is it procurement? Is it somebody else in the organization? Who is it? Who should it be, and why?
I would say 90% of the time it's procurement. Occasionally it'll be finance or an operations group, or internal audit, but the vast majority of the direct connection for us is with procurement teams.
What's the role of AP then in that audit?
In our audit, nothing more than giving us access to historical payment data. We don't integrate too closely with the accounts payable team for this specific kind of auditing.
Yeah, so they don't have to worry about it being another thing on their plate.
No, not AP, not for this kind of auditing. This is more of a procurement function, and or, as I said, maybe operations in certain situations. For example, we do real estate facilities management contract audits, and a lot of times we'll get plugged right into the real estate team. That'd be an operations group at our clients. That would be just one example.
For my AP folks on the line today, what's the talk track for them to socialize this with their procurement stakeholders in the organization? What would be the way to present this in a way that'll lead to action and not a negative reaction?
Well, I think it focuses on the learnings, the opportunities for savings, and a lot of procurement folks have savings goals, right? They're charged with delivering a certain amount of savings, and these programs deliver a lot of savings, and they can add them to their scorecard depending on how they define savings in their organization. But a lot of our clients do that, and they allow that to happen. So when we're fixing those contracts and recovering funds, those are actually results that can be counted to the specific procurement team scorecard, savings scorecard.
I love it. So you can help them meet their objectives, and then maybe they can clean up some of those bad PO processes that lead to downstream errors. But exactly. I digress. We asked our attendees, for value leakage identified during a contract compliance audit, what do you estimate is the typical blended range of actual recovery realized? 52% of our attendees, Mr. John, believe that the value is between 25 and 50%. 26% of our attendees are a little bit more pessimistic. They believe it's less than 25%. 1 in 5 of our attendees peg it at between 50 and 75%. 1.4% of our attendees are shooting for the moon, John. They believe it's more than 75%. What do you make of these findings, John?
Well, on any given audit, of course, and that's why this poll about a blended range. So we're talking about blended over a program approach. on any individual audit, we may have 100%, we may have 0, depending on the issues. And I think that points to the challenges faced in answering a question like this. Again, there's no right or wrong way to answer this question, but it's always interesting to see kind of how, what people's perceptions or understandings are. We talked earlier about the fact that collection on these claims often is dependent upon the contract and how well it was written. And is it clear? Are there conflicting terms in the contract? Like in this section of the contract, it says one thing, in another section it says something completely different. Mm-hmm. That sort of thing is the kind of thing we run into, not that infrequently, right? And so all those those kinds of issues need to be worked through, and they set the stage for a less than full realization of the claim value. But there are other mitigating factors that come into play too. For example, we may have a great contract that's written extremely well, but again, 2 to 4 years after the fact, we're conducting this audit. We present an issue to the supplier, and the supplier says, well, I happen to recall, 3 years ago, I had a conversation with so-and-so in the operations team at your organization. And I have that actually documented in an email that said I could deviate from the contract, right? So they'll comb through their emails and find that old email. And when they can produce that, I'm not saying that will completely derail a finding, but it does present one of those factors that can, over time, diminish the full realization of the claim value. And of course, probably the most important thing that speaks to the ability to maximize recoveries on claims written is the leverage that exists in our client's relationship with their supplier, and they're willing to use the leverage to collect. So as you probably know, if you've been around procurement organizations long enough, sometimes the situation is that the client is fully in control of that supplier relationship. Other times it's completely the opposite, right? And so that's what I mean when I talk about leverage. It's like who is it that has the power in the relationship, and that will help to. I guess that speaks to the ability to address some of these less than fully clear kinds of issues. I don't mean to imply that every issue that's brought forward in a contract compliance or commercial audit program is a shade of gray. There are certainly some that are clear-cut black and white, and those we can achieve full realization on. Others less so. So I would say the fact that this is kind of blending here into probably a somewhere between a 25 and 75 range. My estimate going into this was probably, depending on some of those factors, 40 to 65% in most cases. That's about what we could typically blend out to in a program.
All right. So how can we find some of these problems? How does this help us uncover some of those issues that you've been describing? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this slide here starts to introduce the thinking around, taking what you learn in the contract compliance audit process, again, a reactive approach, one that happens 2 to 4 years after the fact, and using that to inform a process of how we can design some proactive audit methodologies to get us to the problems quicker and maximize the value over time. And when we can do that, we move along the X to the left along the X axis here. We audit sooner, we realize more value. So we definitely are looking to go more proactive, more preventative where that opportunity exists. And here's how we might look at integrating some proactive procedures into the process. First of all, again, to emphasize, it's still built around the traditional contract compliance audit methodology, which is a great source of recoveries to fund the program, to add to additional profitability, and an excellent risk identifying methodology. It helps us to understand where the problems exist in your environment in order to design the proactive methodologies. So when we work through an iterative process. We work a dynamic program plan on your traditional contract compliance audits, usually looking out 2 years to make sure we're picking up the highest risk opportunities in your environment. We're delivering value through that programmatic approach, implementing the learning loop as we go. Now we want to add the proactive pieces where it makes sense. What we've got here is some categories of types of proactive procedures that we can employ. So things like pre-event audits are those kinds of approaches that can be taken, and I'm going to go into this in more detail in a minute, that can be taken before the problem even exists. Let's fix the problem before it even happens. That's the best approach of all, right? And there's some very specific ways we can do that. We can also do diagnostic procedures to go in and try to pinpoint a problem, a process, a control that may need to be improved, and fix it proactively to, realize the sustained benefits over time. We can employ accelerated procedures. For example, if we have a high-risk supplier that we know has had trouble complying with the contract, we can put them on a continuous monitoring program and monitor them quarterly, just to spot check what they're doing and making sure that they're getting it right, rather than waiting another 2 to 4 years to find out, oh gosh, you know what? They never did fix those problems. We went 2 to 4 more years and still sustained the same kinds of problems. Real-time audits quickly are on-site audits that can be done during, high-risk procedures. For example, CapEx projects, plant turnarounds, abnormal events. For example, we did a on-site audit, boots on the ground, during a oil spill that happened in the past. These are chaotic events that can easily go out of control, and by putting a proactive procedure in place, you're going to help yourself to control that kind of a situation. And then specific risk audits are ones where you may want to target a high risk provision in a contract. For example, I have a client that has a lot of suppliers that have per diem clauses in their contracts, and the client recognized that their per diem provisions were being heavily abused. So in that case, instead of auditing dozens of individual supplier top to bottom comprehensively, we audited horizontally across those suppliers to audit that per diem clause across the entire breadth of that group to ensure that we were bringing that provision into compliance. So these are all things that can be done in a complementary way to the traditional contract compliance audit to maximize value in a proactive approach. Make sense?
It does indeed. Is this a kind of thing that you're making? What type of time commitment should you plan to make to this type of contract audit to make sure you get the most out of it? This doesn't strike me as a hit and run kind of thing, John.
Well, the audit process, the contract compliance audit process itself is something that we typically plan to use resources on the part of the client, anywhere from 4 to 12 hours spanned over the course of that entire audit, which can take up to 18 weeks to perform. So it's definitely it's not a heavy lift in that time frame, and most of that time is spent on the back end of the audit, evaluating our findings, determining what it is that you as the client feel is a legitimate recoverable issue, and then working to pursue that recovery with the supplier with us. As far as the learning loop components, we can build low touch learning loop elements that don't require a lot of intense involvement. Certainly we need some oversight to make sure that we're hitting on the points that are resonating with you as a client, but not a heavy lift as far as that's concerned. When it comes to these proactive methodologies, again, most of this falls on our plate in terms of the execution. We just bring the good learnings and findings back to our client to action with a corrective action. I mean, the corrective action component does fall to the client with our guidance and expertise on helping to identify and address those leakage points.
That sounds great. That brings us to our next poll question. which is about to be displayed on your screen. This time we want to know, what would you estimate the impact on the program value delivered resulting from a shift to an equal weighting of proactive approaches within the commercial compliance auditing? What would you estimate the impact on the program value delivered resulting from a shift to an equal weighting of proactive approaches within the commercial compliance auditing? Does it deliver 2x program value, 3x program value, 4x program value, more than 5x program value, or something else? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. What's the biggest mistake folks make when they try to do a contract compliance audit on their own, John?
There's an assumption that they, I think it's probably a lack of understanding of how to best identify risk and how to best validate compliance. So there's an entire methodology that we take in terms of how we go about it, and I think there may be an assumption if somebody, and we don't see it that often actually, but occasionally folks will attempt to take on pieces and parts of validating whether a supplier billed them correctly. And that's usually what it is, pieces and parts. I mean, our approach is comprehensive. We come in and we take 4 years of activity and we audit it comprehensively, as I said earlier, for all those material financial risks. And we do it, built on the knowledge of many years of doing this, and get the answers that we need in the most efficient way possible and accurate as well. I mean, there's a lot of complexity in these terms, and being able to identify and quantify the value associated with a contract non-compliance can be very challenging.
We asked our attendees, what would you estimate the impact on the program value delivered resulting from a shift to an equal weighting of proactive approaches within commercial compliance auditing? Well, 43% of you believe that the program value, that shifting to an equal weighting would deliver a 2x improvement in program value. A little more than 1/3 of you said it would deliver a 3x improvement in program value. 10% of you said 4x. 1.5% of you said 5x. 7.5% of you think it's something else, or maybe you're not so sure. All right, John, so what can we expect?
I mean, we believe the value that can be delivered from a fully realized commercial compliance program can be greater than 5x. And that
greater than 5x?
Greater than 5x. And that's built on the understanding of an active learning loop and integration of the proactive methodologies combined with the historical recoveries. Those three value drivers are quite substantial in what they can deliver to our clients' organizations.
All right, so talk to me about how we can do that. What about these proactive methodologies?
Yeah, so this, speaking back to the earlier slide where we talked about the various categories of proactive methodologies, the very first one, if you remember, was the pre-event methodologies. And this really involves getting in and getting our folks involved in the process very early, whether it's prior to contract award, prior to finalization of rate details in the contract, or prior to payment, wherever the case may be. But getting us in, eyes and boots on the ground to look and validate where this makes sense to do, to correct the problem before it happens. So often when we go in to do a contract compliance audit, we're auditing to a contract that, truthfully, from a contract auditor's perspective, we could have avoided many of the problems right up front had we had an opportunity to work with our client ahead of time to put the contract together correctly to begin with. And that's an important idea, right? So if we can If we can get in there and do that work ahead of time, we're going to help our clients to avoid the problems that may come down the road. And same thing with pre-project. I mean, there's certain rates that have to be agreed upon. For example, you might have cost-based labor rates. You might have complex billing provisions around markups and adders and margin computations and gain share, pain share kind of provisions in your contracts that are really kind of sometimes hard to understand how to manage those, how to write the contract language in a way that, first of all, the ability for the supplier to be compliant or to maintain compliance is there, but also it's going to give you or your auditors the opportunity to come in after the fact to ensure that the contract was complied with. And that detailed level through your commercial provisions is critically important. And then later, moving to prepayment. This prepayment, I mean, obviously we're not in a situation where we're going to audit prepayment audit every invoice that comes through the door. But where this does make sense is in very complex invoices that are submitted, where there's a voluminous amount of backup, and there's no way that you have the ability to validate that invoice before the payment goes out. So what happens? You end up just signing off on it. Maybe you spot check a few pages. Okay, sign off on that invoice. It goes in for payment, gets paid. What we've done is we've built a team of cost-effective audit folks that can go in prior to payment, proactively review certain key aspects of that invoice prior to payment, and either correct it before payment or provide you with the insight on what you need to do to correct it, and therefore eliminate and avoid that problem going forward. So I think these three pieces, as I mentioned earlier, are the biggest opportunities we have for proactivity in this space. And here's how we might apply it. In this case, in a CapEx project, right? So this is a situation where we have a definitive beginning and a definitive end to a project. And we can employ all these various types of audits throughout the process, depending on your needs and your wants and your desires and where we think risks exist. And obviously the desire all along is to maximize the program value, the ROI on the program. So you can see here the project life cycle, and this is point in time going from left to right, integrating pre-award contract reviews at the beginning, coming in and reviewing the general contractor, the subcontractor contracts, the material supplier contracts prior to award, making sure that they're all put together correctly. When it comes to labor service providers, doing the labor rate audit in advance, this is an incredible savings opportunity. Let's do it ahead of time. Let's not try to fix it after the fact or simply never fix it, which oftentimes is too often the times is what happens. In very complex long-term projects, sometimes clients want to have continuous prepayment auditing, where we would engage on a monthly basis to come in and audit the biggest, most complex invoices prior to payment, as I talked about a minute ago, and or in-flight audits, which would be audits conducted more holistically, but at specific periods during the life of the project. And then finally, an endpoint audit. So this would be an approach where we would come in at the end of this project, prior to final payment, prior to final reconciliation with the general contractors, and do an audit and make sure that if there's any discrepancies, any issues of non-compliance, which there frequently are, I'll have to tell you, especially with our team who's expert at identifying those kind of problems, is getting that reconciled before you make your final payments out to that supplier. So this is proactive audit in action in a project based billing cycle environment. Many of these same opportunities exist in a more kind of continuous billing cycle with suppliers, but this is just a way that I wanted to illustrate it to you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move on to talk about, well, where do we go from here? And this would be my recommendation if any of this resonated with you. And that is, first and foremost, find a partner who's experienced and understands how to be successful, not only with contract compliance audits, but with all the other value add opportunities that we talked about here today. Contract compliance auditing can be complicated. It's a complex set of analysis that takes place with usually your biggest, most strategic suppliers. And we're interfacing with not only some of the more senior people in your organization, but in your supplier's organization. So it's important that you trust this kind of work to somebody who has a long track record of success and really understands how to be successful in the space. Once you've selected the right partner, critically important, we talked in one of the poll questions talked about where do you see the priorities in terms of objectives. Setting the objectives with clarity is incredibly important, because not everybody, as we talked about, there was no right or wrong answer to that question. Any auditor is going to help you to achieve your goals when they clearly understand what you want to achieve out of the program. Establishing strong governance and a program management model, another critically important element. Having a well thought through program plan, so you know how you're going to attack risk in your environment and how you're going to deliver value back to the organization, and ensuring then finally that you're launching those proactive methodologies as a key component to maximize overall value is what's going to be required for you to move from reactive to proactive in your audit program. And with that, I don't have anything else. Mark, any questions?
Indeed, yeah. We're going to move into the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already submitted your question for John, or if you've thought of another question for John, go ahead, use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your question to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Ram is wondering, are the green concepts incorporated in your compliance audits? I assume we're talking about ESG here. Is that part of the mix?
Are we talking about recoveries, or I'm not sure what the question is? Sorry. Can you clarify, Mark?
Yeah, so I assume he's saying, is the green concept incorporated in the procurement contracts?
Oh, ESG.
Yes.
Well, we're focused on the compliance to the financial terms and conditions of the contracts. Contracts have a lot of obviously a lot of opportunities for non-compliance beyond financial. Our focus is on financial. Honestly, we have not touched on ESG. No, the answer to that is no, not yet. But I did talk earlier about the fact that we can take on non-financial risks as part of our financial work. There's an efficiency that can be gained there, and that's something. Any non-financial risk that is something that is within our capability. We're happy to add to deliver, to maximize the overall value delivered.
We have a question here from Christine. You touched on this earlier, but let's make sure we address her question. She writes, what department should be responsible for the contract audit process? Is that the AP department's responsibility?
Not typically, although we interface with AP oftentimes primarily to acquire data and to address questions of deductions or other historical trends in spend and so forth. But primarily, the bulk of our interface with our clients is through their procurement organizations, not accounts payable for this kind of work.
All right. What's your single biggest piece of advice you want to leave these people with today, John?
My single biggest piece of advice is to ensure that if you're considering a contract audit program, that you open your thoughts to the total value opportunity that exists within the commercial compliance audit approach, and which takes into account the value delivered from the learning loop and the corrective actions and moving into the prevention zone to achieve that future cost savings, not limiting to just recoveries. Let's balance recoveries and future cost savings as a overall objective for the program. And then where it makes sense to integrate targeted, proactive methodologies to further supercharge the value that these programs can deliver.
And that will be our final word. John, thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us today. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Laura. Ms. Laura.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, John, for a great webinar today. I do have a few housekeeping notes before we officially close out. Many of you have asked about the on-demand materials. So just a reminder, everyone will be emailed within the next 2 business days from IOFM with the recording of today's live webinar, as well as a PDF of today's presentation. So please look for that email in your inbox within the next 2 business days. Also, if you could please fill out the short evaluation form located on your webinar console. This will help us better serve your needs in future webinars. Thank you again to Mark and John for a great webinar today, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. This webinar was brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by PRGX. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.